You're lying awake, replaying a sentence someone said to you 3 days ago. Maybe it was small, a betrayal at work, a friend who smiled in public and cut you open in private, a message you wish you never read. And now in the dark, your mind keeps writing scenes. What you should have said, what you could still do, the perfect line, the perfect silence, the perfect wound. And the strange part is, it almost feels good, not good in a clean way, more like sugar on the edge of poison. For a moment, revenge gives you shape. It takes the chaos of humiliation and turns it into direction. You were hurt. Now there is a target. You were powerless. Now your mind offers power. So why do we crave revenge so deeply and fear it so much? Because revenge is one of the oldest feelings in the human story. It can feel righteous, clarifying, even sacred. And yet almost nobody wants to live in a world ruled by it. We fantasize about payback, but we also know what happens when it leaves fantasy and becomes action. Families split. Wars begin. Friendships rot from the inside. One injury becomes a chain. You might think revenge is just anger with a plan. But actually, revenge is something much stranger. It is part pleasure, part warning signal, part social weapon, part ancient survival code. It is not only about hurting someone back. In a disturbing way, it is also about restoring the version of yourself that was injured. That's why this feeling can be so hard to reason with. Because revenge doesn't arrive in your mind as a villain. It arrives dressed as justice. And that may be the most dangerous thing about it. Modern psychology has found something unsettling. When people are provoked, the brain can treat retaliation like a reward. In some studies, the same circuitry linked to pleasure and motivation becomes active when someone gets a chance to strike back. The brain region often mentioned here is the nucleus accumbens, part of the reward system. In plain language, being wronged can tilt the mind toward a dark kind of satisfaction, where hurting the person who hurt you starts to feel like relief. That doesn't mean revenge is irrational. In fact, that's exactly why it's so seductive. It feels rational because your body is paying you to want it. Revenge is pain trying to disguise itself as balance. And for a few seconds, maybe it works. The fantasy tightens the loose bolts of your identity. It says, you are not weak, not invisible, not disposable. You can answer this. But there's a second system in you too. Another part of the mind that hesitates, calculates, breaks. The same research suggests that self-control circuits can step in and suppress the urge to retaliate. So even inside one brain, there's a quiet civil war. One system whispering, do it. It will feel good. Another whispering, if you do, this won't end where you think it ends. That tension is not a modern problem. It's ancient. For most of human history, revenge was not just emotion. It was policy. In small groups, long before police, courts, and official systems of punishment, retaliation sent a message. If someone stole from you, humiliated you, betrayed the group, or refused to cooperate, doing nothing could be dangerous. It could signal weakness. It could invite more harm. A retaliatory act did something beyond the moment itself. It announced to everyone watching that certain lines had a cost. In that sense, revenge was never only personal, it was social theater. It said, if you injure me, you injure someone who answers back. You think revenge is about the past, but in evolutionary terms, it may have been built for the future, not just to punish one offense, but to prevent the next 10. That helps explain a strange fact about human behavior. People will sometimes pay a cost to punish someone, even when there is no obvious reward waiting for them. Researchers call one version of this. The phrase sounds contradictory, but the idea is simple. People are often willing to punish non-cooperators, freeloaders, or cheaters even when it costs time, energy, or status. Why? Because a group where nobody punishes betrayal can quickly become a group where betrayal spreads. Cooperation, in other words, may need teeth. Civilization is not built only on kindness. It is also built on the fear of consequences. And yet this is where the story turns, because the very instinct that may help protect fairness can also destroy it. Once revenge becomes moral in your own eyes, it becomes almost impossible to measure. What feels proportionate to you often feels excessive to the other person. When people take revenge, they usually experience it as restoring equity. But when people receive revenge, they often see it as going too far. Each side feels like the true victim. Each side believes it is merely answering what came before. That is how revenge becomes a loop. A slap becomes an insult. The insult becomes a humiliation. The humiliation becomes a betrayal. Soon, nobody remembers the original wound with clarity. What survives is only the feeling that something must be answered. Justice looks precise from the inside and cruel from the outside. That's why revenge is so frightening. Not because we don't understand its appeal, but because we do. Some of the bloodiest chapters in human history were not driven by random chaos, but by this logic of repayment. Feuds, clan conflicts, cycles of retaliation that lasted years or generations. One death justified another. One disgrace demanded another. Revenge promised closure, but kept creating inheritance. Children were born into unfinished anger. And if that sounds distant, it really isn't. Most revenge today doesn't look like a sword or a duel. It looks like screenshot culture, silent exclusion, reputation warfare, a public post written to tell the truth but designed to wound. The forwarded message, the strategic leak, the perfectly timed coldness. Modern revenge often wears the face of information. Technology didn't kill revenge, it industrialized it. Now humiliation can scale. One moment of pain can be copied, shared, archived, replayed, and because audiences are always watching, retaliation can feel even more tempting. It isn't just about hurting the other person. It's about recovering status in public, about proving to unseen spectators that you were not the one who lost. That's why revenge online can feel almost addictive, not only because anger is stimulating, but because visibility changes the stakes. In older forms of revenge, the audience might be a village. Now it can be millions. And still, even after the post, the expose, the cutting reply. So many people describe the same aftermath. Fantasy of revenge is often cleaner than the reality because fantasy allows a perfect ending. Reality doesn't. The other person may not feel what you hoped they'd feel. They may retaliate. They may deny it. They may move on. And then you're left with the most uncomfortable possibility of all. Maybe the injury is still inside you because it was never going to be solved from the outside. That's the deeper mechanism. Revenge is often mistaken for emotional surgery. We imagine we can cut the hurt out by placing it in someone else, but pain does not move that neatly. Sometimes revenge is less about justice than about refusing to feel powerless. It gives form to helplessness. It transforms shame into action. In that sense, revenge can be intoxicating because it rescues the self from collapse. The mind would rather be dangerous than defenseless. The urge to punish is often the fear of being nobody. And that brings us to the part we don't like to admit. We don't just fear revenge because it can harm others. We fear it because it reveals something about us. It shows how thin the distance can be between morality and appetite, between fairness and domination, between wanting the world to be right and wanting another human being to hurt because we hurt. That doesn't mean every desire for revenge is evil. Sometimes anger is evidence that a line was crossed. Sometimes the impulse to retaliate points to something real. Dignity matters, trust matters, justice matters. A world with no anger at betrayal would not be peaceful. It would be numb. The challenge is that anger can be true without being wise. And wisdom begins when you ask a different question. Not, how do I make them feel what I felt? But, what am I actually trying to restore? Safety, respect, control, meaning, a self-image that shattered the moment they did what they did? Once you see that, revenge stops looking like a solution and starts looking like one possible answer among many, often the loudest one, not the best one. This is why forgiveness, when it happens, is so misunderstood. It is often framed as softness, surrender, forgetting, but sometimes forgiveness is something much colder and stronger than that. Sometimes it is the refusal to let someone keep writing your inner life after they've already harmed you. Not pardon, not approval, release. Not all wounds should be reconciled. Not all harms should be absorbed with a smile. Some people should be confronted. Some systems should be punished. Some lines do require consequences. But consequence and revenge are not always the same thing. One can protect the future, the other can become addicted to replaying the past. That distinction matters, because a society without accountability decays, but a society ruled by revenge burns. And maybe that is the final contradiction. Revenge feels like reclaiming control, yet it often means your enemy still controls your emotional weather. They strike once, and then you keep reopening the wound in their name. You become both injured and recruited. You think revenge is the opposite of fear. But often, revenge is fear that has found a script. Fear of being small, fear of being forgotten. Fear that if pain goes unanswered, then maybe it didn't matter. So perhaps the real question is not why revenge tempts us. Of course it does. It speaks the language of injury fluently. The more unsettling question is why some people, at the edge of real pain, choose not to follow it. Maybe because they realize that not every fire deserves more oxygen. Maybe because they know that becoming judge, jury, and executioner changes the shape of the soul. Or maybe because they understand something revenge can never admit. Not every victory that hurts your enemy heals you. And that leaves us with a final thought. When you imagine revenge, what are you really trying to save? The world's balance, or your reflection in it? Because sometimes the darkest part of revenge is not that it wants blood. It's that it promises identity. And if that promise still has power over us, then the old mystery remains. When we say we want justice, how often are we really asking pain to prove that we still